Last week on the 10th of July, there was a state of play on Ghost of Yōtei. I just wanted to make a video just giving some trailer reactions and impressions, alongside a bit of a conversation around whether sequels need to be more of the same, or they need to do something great and innovative to kind of stand out compared to the original predecessor. Whilst this is a vocal minority of people saying these things, that, you know, it looks more of the same, it doesn't look like it does anything to iterate on what was there before, I think there are a few gameplay changes worth noting, and I just think there's plenty here to get stuck into, so let's get to it. So a large portion of the state of play was actually around the main character Atsu and the story behind them. So there's a lot of people comparing this to Blue Eye Samurai, or even more recently Assassin's Creed Shadows. Blue Eye Samurai, if you haven't seen it, is a great animation on Netflix. It's essentially a female samurai who is trying to get revenge on a group of people who wronged her and killed her family. It's almost identical in terms of the story. And a lot of people have pointed out that Shadows is almost exactly the same as well, down to the female character. And I'm not sure where that whole trope seems to have appeared from, where it's female samurai doing revenge stuff. But I'm all about it, to be honest. The developer said that Atsu herself is considered to be an onryo, which is essentially just a Japanese demon in folklore, a vengeful spirit that goes after people. So in this case, there's the Yōtei 6, a big gang of people who came through and killed her family, I presume the whole village. And then from there, she's just trying to get revenge. It looks years later, she looks very young when this happens. So she's coming back as a fully grown adult, trying to take revenge. And it looks like these people have all taken up seats of power in various places. They've gone their separate ways, and now she's going through and cleaning house. The first thing that I really wanted to point out here, because it's pretty much the first gameplay related thing they show on the showcase, was what they do with the SSD. So there's not very many games and not very many publishers who take advantage of the SSDs that are in things like the PlayStation 5 at the moment. People just don't seem to utilize them for whatever reason. They're still having people shimmy through rocks and all that sort of thing. And it looks like they've spent a lot of time working around that for Ghost of Yōtei. And it's these sections where you can go between the past and the present at the press of a button. Now, I think that that's going to be a case of you'll be in set locations, you'll cross a fence or something like that, or like a Torii gate, and then they'll be like, right, okay, now you can press the right stick to change between the two different timelines. And it is seamless based off the trailer it showed. It looked pretty seamless, but I'm not sure how that would go. I think it's going to be good. I think it's going to be a seamless transition between the two things. But it allows you to sort of get the background behind what's happened and see what the place looks like now, without having to go through cutscenes. It makes it a lot more in the world, a lot more diegetic. It makes it a lot more seamless, a lot more immersive. And I'm all behind it. I'm all for things that use the SSD, because no one uses it really. You got like Ratchet and Clank. That's about it. It's just one of those things. I like to see people use it, and this looks like a great way to enhance storytelling and use the SSD. The next thing I want to talk about is the way that they've changed exploration. So they had quite a lot of this in Ghost of Tsushima, but the exploration itself has changed to more, again, immersive, a more diegetic way of doing it. They have nothing on the map at all. So on Ghost of Tsushima, you had your little question marks. You could use the wind to tell you where to go. The wind's still in the game in Ghost of Yōtei, but it looks as though what they're trying to do is they're trying to encourage you to go and find things for yourself. So again, they're using plumes of smoke, you know, go and find out what they're. But then when you get to the plumes of smoke, it might be in an enemy camp. You clear out that enemy camp, and then you're able to interrogate and ask whatever you want. So you can pick from a list of what you want to do, what you want to talk about with this person, what you want to interrogate them about. And then you'll actually have the option to find new locations based off of what you ask them about. So you can only ask them about one thing, then you go and do that one thing, which is great because you can just follow certain paths to get to certain people. And I think it means that you can kind of go after this Yōtei 6 in pretty much any order you like, find different bounties and different missions in any order you like. And it stops you from going, right, okay, I'm going to have to go here and take this off, then go here and take this off. It does make it a nightmare for completionists like me who want to do everything, but it looks really good. It's a really good way of doing it, a really good way of changing up. I'm glad that they've put something in to change the way that the open world works, because open worlds are getting a bit done, and I think people are more going towards wide linear settings now, so they're trying to sort of get away from the open world a bit. and making more dense, packed out areas, but in a smaller space, which I'm all for, to be honest. But it's been a while since we've had a good open world to get stuck into. Next, let's get stuck into the combat. So they've changed the way that the combat works quite significantly, and I think it fits the themes of Ghost of Tsushima versus Ghost of Yōtei pretty well. So in Ghost of Tsushima, you had Jin Sakai, you had his sword, and you had the different stances that you could go to fight the different enemies. And essentially what you were doing was you would see a certain enemy, you'd switch to a certain stance, and that would be the best way to defeat them. Low stance versus dual wielders, I think it was. I can kind of remember high stance for shields. It's probably the other way around, but that's how I remember it. But in Ghost of Yōtei, what they've done is they've actually given you different weapons. So you've got the Odachi, the Kusarigama, you've got the spear, and you've got dual swords, as well as the original katana that you would normally have. And what this does is this allows you to fight against different enemies using different weapons, and essentially different weapons work best against different wielding types. So someone with a spear, you're better off using dual swords, for instance, and then someone with a dual sword, you're better off using an Odachi, something like that. Basically, there's a counter to each one, kind of like a rock, paper, scissors, a bit with the stance system, but there's significantly more weapons to go through, which basically opens up the combat for a load of different opportunities. And then if you think about it, if you look in the trailer, they actually switch weapons on the fly mid-fight. So an enemy can switch weapons the same way you can switch weapons, which means that rather than just being stuck using just the sword for the whole game, they're going to force you to switch between spear, Kusarigama, Odachi, all of those on the fly mid-fight, and make sure that you're actually engaging with the combat system rather than just leaving it and sort of saying, right, okay, switch to low stance, right, okay, you're done. It's a really good way of switching up the combat so that you actively have to pay attention. You're not just waiting for a counter. You're not just blocking and then waiting for an opening to strike. You're not just spamming ninja stars or something like that to try and get through the combat as fast as possible. You're actually paying attention. You're having to switch on the fly. They are evolving as you are evolving. And I think it fits the character pretty well that they're trying to cause as much damage as possible. If you think about it, Jin Sakai was a noble samurai before he went down the path of the ghost. And now, if you look at Atsu, she doesn't have this formal training. She doesn't have all this code of honor. She's just looking to cause as much damage, as much carnage as possible, as fast as possible to get the fight over with. She's desperate. She wants to inflict pain. And I think the change in moveset is absolutely perfect for the character they're trying to go for. It also looks like it's leaning a lot into the supernatural side of things, which we started to see in the DLC for Ghost of Tsushima. But it genuinely looks as though there's people with flaming blades, and there's someone who's like made of birds and all that sort of thing. There was little bits and pieces of it throughout Ghost of Tsushima where you would chase down the legends, and then the legends would look slightly different, and they'd have intros. And I'm sure there was a guy made of birds in Ghost of Tsushima. I could be wrong. If I'm right, I'll put the fight up on the screen now, but I'm sure there was a person made of birds. But it's just one of those things where I think I love the idea of Japanese folklore. I love everything about it. You know, I read a lot of horror manga and stuff like that. So anything that looks horrific, anything that looks weird and supernatural, I'm all for. I wasn't sure that they would go that way with this. I think it's still going to be grounded in a lot of realism, but they're going to have bits and pieces that seem supernatural. But I think that could well just be how Atsu's built up these demonic people in her head, rather than it being really what's happening on screen. I think that that's what they're going to do. I think they're going to sort of say, well, she sees them as demons, so that's how she depicts them when she fights them. It makes the fights more interesting, whilst also not ruining the realism of the game. That's my thoughts. That's what I think they're going to go for. So the person looks like a winged demon, but really he was just a normal guy who was, you know, horrible, basically. The last thing that I want to run through from the trailer was the amount of customization there is. It's nice to see. I'm all for it, but it's not the be-all end-all for me, really. I'm glad that it's there. I'm glad that they've expanded on it. I'm surprised that they took the time out to showcase a lot of it. They showcased the photo mode as well, as if it was some big, huge deal, which I guess maybe there is a big community for photo modes in Ghost games, but I don't know. It seemed a bit odd to spend as much time as they did on it. But, you know, it's good to see that it's there. They've also massively lent into this vibes-based gaming. which I feel more and more people seem to be going into this vibes-based game, like Death Stranding 2, it's a vibe kind of thing. And they've added in a few different modes, which I really like the look of. They've got Samurai Cinema, which is essentially Japanese voice acting dubbed in Japanese, and then with English subtitles, which 100% is the way that I'll be playing the game. Then they've got the Mud and Blood mode. I'm calling it the Mud and Blood mode. Essentially what it is, it's a game mode that zooms in the camera during combat, makes more viscera, so I think there's more dismemberment, there's more blood, there's more mud whenever you have a fight, just to make it more cinematic, which is great. And then for some reason, I'm not entirely sure why, I don't know if people were asking for this or if it was something that someone thought was a good idea somewhere. I'm not entirely convinced it was a good idea, but I'll let people, have their things, but they brought out a lo-fi beats mode. So essentially while you're traversing the world, they've got lo-fi beats going on, and it's a mix of lo-fi beats with Japanese music, which, it sounds great, but I just couldn't see myself being immersed in a game, playing a game and listening to lo-fi beats. It seems so at odds with what they're trying to convey with the realism and the drama, and then you just on your horse to lo-fi beats. It doesn't make sense to me. There's such a thing as vibes gaming, and I'm all for vibes gaming, but I found it very odd as a mode. It's not for me, but maybe it's for you. You enjoy it, but I found it was a very weird addition. Moving on from the trailer, I just want to talk a bit about sequels, a bit about the way that Sony do sequels, and whether or not I feel like Ghost of Yōtei has done enough to warrant it being called a sequel rather than a bit of DLC expansion. Sony definitely have a thing about iterative sequels. We've seen it with Horizon. Horizon was probably the worst for it, to be honest. We've seen it with God of War, where we didn't get that much added. It was more of an iteration. Now we've got Ghost of Yōtei, and even to an extent, I suppose Death Stranding was a bit of an iterative sequel. Essentially, very little of the gameplay actually changes. The UI stays the same, the traversal mechanics stay the same, the animations stay the same, a lot of the fighting stays the same, and that's where people get their backs up and say, well, this is basically just a DLC, it's an expansion. This isn't a new game, it doesn't feel new. The Last of Us 2 was probably the better version of a sequel, because if you think about it, the way that the traversal mechanics, the way that the fighting mechanics, the shooting, pretty much everything got overhauled in that game. It wasn't just the graphical realism that The Last of Us sort of ran away from and was so good with. Yes, the story was a bit controversial and it was a very long story. They introduced new playable characters, but the way that the traversal worked, the way that the movements worked, the animations, there was a lot of time spent making that game feel brand new. If you go to Last of Us Part 1 now to Last of Us Part 2, that probably feels almost exactly the same. And that to me would be the iterative sequel. Not from the old Last of Us, the original Last of Us, versus Last of Us Part 2. That is night and day, in my opinion anyway. It's not just a graphical overhaul, but the way that everything's been done from the ground up. People have pointed out Spider-Man 2 felt a bit samey as well. I feel like they added enough into that with things like the wingsuit. They added in, swapping out the characters on the fly. There was quite a few different bits and pieces that they added in that I thought were great, and they made a significant addition. But a lot of these sequels are coming out and people are feeling, it's either more of the same or quite lukewarm towards it. So the original gets an 89 and then the sequel gets an 85, and they're both high 80s marks. But it's one of those things where they're not entirely convinced that it's better because it feels like more of the same. I'm totally with that. I totally believe that when you don't overhaul the gameplay enough and you don't change things enough, it can only be about the same. Unless the story's really good, it can only be about the same. So if you look at something like Red Dead 1 versus Red Dead 2, that had a lot of time spent on animations, on mechanics, all those sorts of things that make it stand out massively from what it originally was. And yeah, the dev time isn't as far between them. The budget's not going to be like a Rockstar budget. But there is definitely a difference that you can see between Red Dead 1 and Red Dead 2 that isn't just graphical. It's entirely gameplay focused. And that's what people are after when they're saying, this looks the same, this feels the same. If you look at Ghost of Yōtei specifically, you can see that it's the same, rope swinging animation. You can see the same horse riding animation, the same walking animation. A lot of it is the same, but it has new features. So the combat has been entirely changed with the way that it works, where you're switching weapons on the fly. You can get a wolf companion that does insta-kills with you. Come on, But when you did like the standoff and then kill them, you now have a wolf that does the standoff with you. What more could you want? I personally would have liked to see the UI change. I think the health bar's different, but that's about it. I would genuinely really like to see UIs change between these iterative sequels, because the UI on something like Horizon Forbidden West versus Horizon Zero Dawn, the UI was practically the same. Nothing really changed. And I think that that's what they could probably have done to make people say less of, well, this just looks the same. Like even the button prompts, I think, are the same shape and color and everything. So it's just one of those things. I think that's what people are trying to get at. I don't personally agree. I think the combat changes, the open world changes, the environmental changes, adding in companions, adding in a ton of weapons, all of that sort of stuff is more than enough to justify a sequel and say this is a new game. I think it will feel similar, but new. I don't think it's going to be as good as Ghost of Tsushima. It would depend massively on the story. The story of Ghost of Tsushima was genuinely what I believe carried that game. I think that game was unreal. Everything about it, the vibes, the environment, the graphics, all of it was great. But that story was spot on. I had no notes whatsoever for that story. It was perfect. So I'll be surprised if Ghost of Yōtei can top that in any way. And I think just to round this off, I think these iterative sequels are just devs trying to be safe. I think studios are telling developers, right, be safe, make things, that was a 10 out of 10 game or a 9 out of 10 game, make that again. And I think devs are being encouraged to be very safe mechanically and to sit in their wheelhouse. Don't change too much, don't make it any controversy. They're kind of scared to take risks. I think everywhere at the minute is scared to take risks, especially game studios. Let's just do safe sequels. Let's work on the franchises we know are successful. We'll make safe sequels that just sort of iterate on what's already there. We'll change a few mechanics and then we'll put that out. We'll get, an 80%, 90% on Metacritic, and then we'll be happy. That's all we need is just more of the same safe games. We'll not take any risks. We'll not put any new IP out. But I think that that's what hurts these sequels a little bit. They're not doing enough. They're not changing enough to seem so mechanically different from the first game. We're perfectly comfortable with new things. We're more than happy to try out new genres, new elements of gameplay. Just be adventurous. Just stop being so safe. Add some new stuff in. I've got no arguments whatsoever with being safe, but I just think if you want something that's going to hit better and be better than the original, I think most of these Sony sequels aren't. I just don't. I think most of them don't hit. They're good, they're great, but they're just not as good as the original, and they don't hit like the original, because the original is a new IP. It's something completely brand new. And then when the sequel comes out, you're like, this is just more of the same. And I get it. I do get the sentiment. But what do you think? Ghost of Yōtei is due out 2nd of October 2025 on the PlayStation 5. It'll be on PC in about 2 years probably. Let me know what you thought on the state of play down in the comments alongside what you thought of the video. Don't forget to like and subscribe, all the lovely good stuff to keep in the algorithm. Please look after each other, and I'll catch you soon. Goodbye.